So knowledge is power. If we are able to have an understanding of how water's natural biogeochemical cycles occur, then we can better understand how our actions are a disruption to the natural systems. The water we use every day is super old. Just like Earth itself, it's been around for billions of years. The Earth has a limited amount of water that always gets recycled in a closed biogeochemical system. Since we do not lose or gain water from other sources, it's important to protect the water that we have. So the water cycle is a natural process. When water rotates through different forms, solid, liquid, or vapor, the process improves the quality of water. Did you know that nearly 97% of the world's water is salty or otherwise undrinkable? Another 2% is locked in ice caps and glaciers. That leaves just 1% for us, and it's sadly being polluted by industrial agriculture practices. So one way industrial ag is affecting the natural biogeochemical cycle of water is through runoff. Natural runoff is water from rain or melted snow, which is not absorbed and held by the soil, but runs over the ground through loose soil. This runoff is water leaving fields because of rain, melted snow, or irrigation. As the runoff moves, it picks up and carries pollutants, and these pollutants deposit into ponds, lakes, and local waterways, and also underground sources of drinking water. This runoff can include pollution such as pesticides, herbicides, salts, heavy metals, and nutrients such as excess nitrogen and excess phosphorus. Agricultural runoff is the leading source of water pollution in rivers and lakes. It can trigger a process called eutrophication. This is where excess phosphorus produces dead zones in the water where there's little oxygen for fish and wildlife to survive. It's irreversible even when external inputs of phosphorus have stopped. The sediment can still maintain high enough levels that the ecosystem can never be returned to its original state. The pesticides in runoff can also accumulate in fish, which can expose people who eat the fish to high levels of these chemicals, which is called biomagnification. Large farms that raise livestock are sources of point source pollution. If they do not treat their animal waste materials responsibly, these substances can enter nearby water as raw sewage, radically adding to the level and rate of water pollution. So as human population increases, so has our demands on the land. We need more food, and to make more food, we need more water. So consequently, another major impact industrial ag has on the hydrologic cycle is the depletion of groundwater and aquifer reserves by way of irrigation. Irrigation is the artificial watering of land that doesn't get enough water through rainfall. Irrigation is used substantially by most everyone. So groundwater is an extremely valuable resource. It is estimated to hold 94% of Earth's freshwater supply. So when groundwater is used at a rate faster than it can be replenished, it causes an overdraft. Industrial ag accounts for large overdrafts because of the high demand for fresh water in the cultivation of monoculture crops. We currently use groundwater at an unsustainable rate, causing severe shortages in parts of the world. When water is removed from its natural source, it often causes leaching and runoff where it's used. This removal of nutrients in the soil results in farmers using more fertilizers to keep their pastures productive, all while waterways become more polluted. This cycle is not sustainable. We need to begin to look at industrial agriculture and how we can apply more ecologically based systems that better imitate natural environments to decrease our water usage and to stop disrupting natural self-regulating cycles.
Now that we've heard from Sarah and Jessica about the current state analysis of industrial agriculture and the effects it has had on the biogeochemical cycle, let's talk about the direct and indirect drivers of industrial agriculture. Throughout this course, we as a group have found 4 major direct drivers of industrial agriculture, as well as 16 indirect drivers. The 4 direct drivers are the development of the Industrial Revolution and increased demand of food nationwide, the development of a profitable food market, and finally a large number of companies without regard for their negative ecological effects. Each of these direct drivers is supported by 4 indirect drivers, all of which facilitate the direct drivers to continue on. The first direct driver of industrial agriculture is the amount of progress made during the Industrial Revolution, as well as factory development during World War II. Large and efficient machines were created to outperform human laborers at tasks such as pulling grains. This kind of production efficiency was unprecedented, and in the beginning, this was undeniably seen as a benefit to all, unless, of course, you were a farm worker. So began the exploitation of farmlands. With less people needed for work, costs decreased, and with high efficiency in planting, watering, and harvesting, profits increased. Crops were better maintained and provided larger harvests, allowing people to move from country settings into big cities and still have access to food. Next, we see an increased demand for food. The more food required by our country's citizens, the more legitimacy industrial agriculture gained. With a growing population and many people living in large cities, the more we began to depend on industrial agriculture. The United States population currently stands at just over 324 million people. That's 324 million people that require food for survival. And as we saw before, the Industrial Revolution paved a way for farmers to feed the majority of these people. If we consider the fact that the majority of these million consumers are probably ignorant to the negative effects of industrial agriculture, as well as accustomed to receiving foods and goods that do not naturally grow in their region, we can begin to speculate how easy it is to deter people from wanting or demanding a change in our farming systems. Living in a consumerist society with such a large demand for food, we can begin to understand why it is farmers would want to be involved in such a profitable food market. With consumer prices being so far below the cost of buying local and organic, more people are inclined to buy food produced on large industrial farms. More buyers means more money for the farmers, which they can then use to create large marketing platforms to sell more and more of their less nutritious products to the masses. A lack of nutrition education works in favor of the industrial farmer. The less people are made aware of what chemicals are being used on their foods, the less they are inclined to spend their money buying organic. And finally, like we see here with the workers spraying pesticides on a Monsanto farm, large companies are not concerned with being eco-friendly. They are working to make a profit. The less we as the consumer are educated on the techniques and chemicals used on industrialized farms, less prepared we are to make informed decisions about what foods are most beneficial to consume. The idea of buying local and organic produce has only come into popularity in more recent years, and large, ecologically disastrous companies know this. This is why, instead of changing policies and methods, they have resorted to greenwashing and relied on relaxed government policies to allow their pollution to continue.
So, in our research, we came up with two scenarios for sustainability in industrial agriculture. The first one is a more negative scenario, and is what we kind of like currently are living in today. And the second one is more of a sustainable scenario or an ideal scenario. We researched into 5 different sectors: economic, political sector, social policy, international situation, and ecosystem health. For the economic, the non-sustainable scenario is still based on supply and demand, and there's little interest in the environment. For the more sustainable scenario, people help support local producers, like local farmers, and they buy food from them. On the political sector, there's always lobbying from the big companies in the political sector, and they help fund the campaigns. So they look for subsidies and for policies that don't affect the big companies. On a more sustainable scenario, it would be more of the government protecting the environment and also making policies to control those big companies for entering local markets. For the social policy sector, people prefer right now the more high intake calories food, in part due to lack of education. For a more sustainable scenario, we ideally will have consumers more knowledgeable, and they will increase the consumption of healthy food. On the internal situations, we have a lot of import from outside the US due to the damage that we have created on the soil due to industrial agriculture. On a more ideal scenario, we will have reduction of imported food because we would prefer to go and buy from the local farmers For the ecosystem health, we were focusing on the water, and because of the industrial agriculture, the water is consumed at really high rates, so we waste a lot of water. And on our more sustainable scenario, we would be more conscious of the consumption of the water, and we will prefer more of a eco-agriculture, so the consumption of the water is not as high as with industrial agriculture.
The basis of what we've learned so far is that industrial agriculture is undeniably affecting our water supply, and unfortunately it's doing so in a very negative way. We need water to survive, which is why we need to make improving our water quality a priority. If we were to turn to more sustainable types of agriculture, we would be able to focus on practices that would stop polluting our water sources. The most important step to making this change is education. If we can educate our citizens on the harmful effects of industrial agriculture, we can inspire change in communities around the nation. Also, if we start taking policies like the Clean Water Act seriously, we can see a positive change in our way of life. We need to prioritize the monitoring of our water sources, and we can do so by engaging the community and having a fully transparent water quality testing system. The more often we test our water sources, the more we'll know about the effects we are having on the water cycle. Using the EPA's water quality standards, we will be able to test levels of metals, chlorides, organic chemicals, and so much more. And once we are able to set achievable goals, we can engage the community and government agencies to work towards cleaner, safer water together. Water usage is another problem we will have to solve. Industrial agriculture is currently using groundwater at unsustainable rates to grow our monoculture crops. When we use too much of our groundwater, we are left with overdrafts. This shortage of water is an extremely pressing issue. Of course we can't live without water, so why aren't we making it more of a priority to conserve the freshwater sources that we do have? It is our job to push for limits to be set on the usage of these sources. We are the ones that suffer from the effects of these unsustainable farming practices, so we are the ones that need to inspire the changes that need to be made. Setting quantifiable goals is the first step in creating a push for change. One such goal would be to cut the water usage of industrial agriculture by 50% in 10 years. After setting a long-term goal like this, we then need to look at short-term solutions that can eventually help us to meet them. Again, education is key in this process. We need to help show our communities that buying the cheapest options at the store may come back to affect them negatively in the long run. We need to put an emphasis on buying local products that are naturally grown and packed with nutrients. And we need to stray away from this idea that mass producing our food is a normal and healthy way of life. Knowing what we are putting into our bodies is the first step in righting the wrongs that we have so carelessly created. So our vision for industrial agriculture is to eventually get rid of it. Replacing industrial agriculture with more sustainable farming practices is the only way to put an end to the harmful consequences that are affecting us daily. Whether we're starting a community gardens or visiting local farmers markets or just reading the labels to make sure you can feel good about your trip to the grocery store, the responsibility falls on all of us to make a difference.